Hello, everyone. Good morning. We're going to get started now. Welcome to our Similarweb webinar, From Analysis to Achievement and How to Make Your Digital Strategy Stand Out. Just a few items of housekeeping today. You are all on mute. Please put your questions in the Q&A section. If you just hover down at the bottom of Zoom, if you're not familiar with Zoom, you'll see a little Q&A and you can type your questions in there. We'll have some time at the end of the presentation to cover those. This is going to be recorded, and yes, the recording will be sent along with the deck after. So no worries if you miss something or want to go back over it. Okay, and without further ado, I'd like to introduce everyone to Emmanuel Heyman, our Area Vice President for Australia, New Zealand, and Southeast Asia here at Similarweb. He's going to dig into industry conversions, a little bit on search, have a marketing channel focus, and what are the trends we are seeing in fashion and apparel, and buy now, pay later. Manu, over to you.
Thank you so much, Holly, and really lovely to be here this morning and lead this session. As you can hear, I'm not Australian. I was born in France. I lived in different countries in Europe, in the US, in the Middle East, and now in Australia, here out of Sydney. And the accent you're hearing is a little bit a mix of everything, but hopefully you will be able to follow me until the end. And as Holly mentioned, we will leave time for questions. So there was a time before COVID, then there was COVID, and slowly and hopefully we entering a post-COVID area. And when it comes to e-commerce or digital adoption, I see the pandemic really as a prism for three main reasons. Number one, it actually expanded the services and the categories that people transacted online. Number two, it accelerated the acceptance of an online first mindset amongst consumers. And number three, it brought a lot of the stragglers who really previously preferred going physically to their stores to come also online. Now, despite the restrictions being completely lifted now in Australia, many of the behaviors developed during the pandemic have not only stuck, but in some sectors, they've continued to accelerate. Now, just don't take my words for it. Let's look at what the data says. So what you see here is actually the traffic going to the top 250 e-commerce websites here in Australia. And if you look at the industry pre-COVID, so 2019 and 20, you see that we had about 5.2 billion visits to that industry. During the pandemic and the month of lockdown, we see that traffic grew by 41% year over year, and it reached 7.4 billion visits to the top 250 e-commerce websites here in Australia. Now, this year, we see that actually traffic is decreasing a little bit by 3%. But this slight decrease goes hand in hand with restriction easing and people finally being able to go to their stores. But even if it's been a little bit decreasing this year, it's still 2 billion more visits than pre-pandemic. Not only has traffic increased, but so have conversions. And if you look at the conversions here in Australia this year, we see that it's around 4.53%, which is a 17% increase year over year. Now, in the first 5 months of this year, the average conversion rate that you see here in green was above 4%, and we've never seen that before. As you can see in blue, 2021, orange, 2020, the first 5 months of the year, usually conversion rates for e-commerce was below 4%. So this is actually incredible. Now, while the average conversion rate hit more than 5% in September, October, November last year, this was really during the extended lockdowns in major cities here in Australia and during the major holiday seasons here as well, Black Friday, Cyber Monday, Christmas, and so on. But with lockdowns lifted and the start of this year, the conversion rates higher than usual since January, this shows that consumers are a lot more comfortable with e-commerce. So far we've seen two things. Number one, Australians are actually going more online than before. And number two, they're also purchasing more than before. So the next question is, where and how are consumers finding what they're looking for? And web traffic data can shed light on this. And here we can see that more than half of all customer journeys now begin at the search engine. Not only do these channels make up the lion's share of traffic, but acquisitions through other channels have either plateaued or they actually went backwards. With more shoppers moving online, the competition on search engines is only heating up. So the data here shows that e-commerce players are investing a lot in paid search to improve their visibility on search engines. As a result, as you can see here, there's been a 17% year-over-year growth for the paid search channel only. Now, we also have a strong assumption that because of stock shortages and global supply issues, shoppers who were really before accustomed to buy a specific product on a specific website, maybe they cannot find it today. So they need to do a lot more research to try and find a substitute. And as a result, our consumers are doing a lot more research than before. And that's why it's even more important to adapt your content strategy and your paid strategy on search engines. Now, search engines themselves have changed in the recent years. I just want to take a moment to talk about it. With the relatively recent introduction of shopping ads by Google here in Australia in October 2020, this has impacted the user behavior that we have in the country. And we see click-through from these ads growing more and more. So it's particularly important to be mindful of the changes on search engines because now we can see Google is giving shopping ads more prominence than both paid and organic. And this is what you can see here. What you see here is the different type of searches that generates traffic to that industry. And you can see that organic search is actually the only type of search that has decreased over time. And every company is trying really to grow organically. It's usually a sign of a healthy growth. If you grow organically, it's pretty healthy, and the aspiration of a lot of companies to grow and invest in that. But what we see here in Australia is that actually the paid channels have grown a lot more. So paid search grew by 17% year over year. And look at the shopping ads we just mentioned before, because now you see those big shopping ads, those images at the top of your search engine. Well, it did impact the consumer behavior, and we see almost 20% growth year over year. Even image search has grown a little bit as well. So this highlights how important every bit of digital shelf is, and regardless of which online sector your business serves, because each individual industry has seen different trends, and this is what we're going to see now. What you see here is the different categories in the e-commerce sector, and you see that the pandemic has impacted different categories differently. And what we see here on the left side is pretty interesting. You see that the 11.3% growth for craft websites. So all the art and craft project that people started during the pandemic seem to have stuck, and people are keeping up their activities. But if you look at the other side of the coin, you see that consumer electronics, especially around computers, had a very big decrease in traffic. Now, this doesn't mean that we're going to go back to fax machines and buy pens and paper, but it's related to the product life cycle. If you remember, during the lockdowns in Australia, most of us were forced to work from home and set up a home office. So a lot of the people, including myself, had to invest in new computers, new screens, and gears. And you don't replace a computer every few months or every year. So it looks like a lot of the consumers have already invested in new computers, screens, and so on. And they don't really need to replace it right now, and hence this decrease. What is also interesting is the pharmacy sector. Online pharmacies grew by 8.2% in Australia. And probably this is related to the fact that a lot of Australians had to get COVID tests, and it was very hard to find them, so you had to order them online. And in the process, people probably found the convenience, the choice, the flexibility of buying other products. But what we're going to focus on today is the fashion industry. And the reason is because we found some really compelling consumer behaviors, which I will unpack now, because they provide a really clear example into how digital market intelligence can help you and your company keep you ahead of the competition. So starting with the view of what's happening across the sector as a whole, we can see that in the 12 months to April this year, the Australian fashion industry attracted about 103 million visits in the entire industry. Now, over the past years, we've seen a lot of pure play companies launch and eat into the market share of more established players. And that's why we've split this chart into two. In blue, you're going to see the brick and click stores. Those are the more established brands that have physical presence, but also an operation online. And in green, you have the companies only operating online. Now, what we can see immediately is that the seasonality is actually pretty much the same. You see peaks in traffic during the holiday seasons. And in February, you actually see a huge decline after these holidays. So the seasonality is pretty much the same. But what is really interesting is to look at the growth of these companies. And the growth actually was a lot more impressive for pure players, so the ones operating online only. And it grew a lot faster, as you can see, 7%. Now, what would be now interesting to see is how they get this growth. If we look at the marketing channels, we can see that companies have really invested in their paid channels. So you see, for instance, paid search has increased dramatically year over year. And if you look at really, even if we zoom a little bit closer, you're going to see that paid search has increased by 37% year over year, referral partnerships 18%, display ads 15%. Even the social channels, and we know how social channels become a lot more relevant nowadays, is a lot more important for the pure players. When you look at the brick and click stores, they're heavily relying on organic search. Now, as a retailer in this space, you could then compare your own acquisition channels and look at the wider industry or your direct competition to try and optimize accordingly. But the fashion and apparel industry is quite broad. So what we're trying to do here is look at specific subcategories and see how companies are actually performing. But not only that, see what is the consumer interest, what are people really searching for, so that you, if you're operating in this sector, you can actually try and provide the answers to what they're looking for. So what you see here is actually the subcategories of the fashion industry. And we see that fast fashion retailers have the most share of the market with 63%, activewear 15%, luxury fashion 10%, footwear 8%, and undergarments 4% in Australia. Now, from here, we're going to zoom and look at each industry and see who's performing best again, and what is the consumer demand. Starting with the fast fashion retailer, because this is probably the biggest one, we can see clearly a leader here, which is the Iconic. The Iconic has about 84 million visits. But if you look at in terms of growth, you can see Shine actually grew 72% year over year. Now, Shine only officially launched locally in November last year, so the impressive 72% growth could be attributed to a relatively low base, but still it's quite impressive. Sorry. If we look at the actual search trends, we see actually a trend emerging here. You see the top 3 searches are formal dresses, and wedding guest dresses. And this seems to suggest that all the events and weddings that were postponed because of COVID last year are back on the agenda, and people are dressing up again. It could also correlate to the fact that a lot of us have to go back physically to our workplace, so that could also overlap with that. But if we look at the male category, we actually see puffer jackets or cargo pants in the top searches. So clearly it looks like men were not invited to the same weddings or events as women, because we see very different trends. But that was super interesting. And if we look now at the activewear, in Australia, Rebel Sport is actually the leader with 44 million visits. The biggest challenger would be JD Sports with 26 million. And we ran a similar analysis on fashion and apparel sector last year in 2021. And athleisure was really the dominant force. And I remember Nike and Adidas got a huge increase in traffic because people were working from home, wanted some comfy clothing. But this year, actually, we see that both brands have a decrease of 14% in their traffic to their websites. And the dominant force today is really around home workout. And this is what you're going to see now. If we look at the top searchers, you will see things like yoga mats, running shoes, resistant bands, pull-up bars, So again, maybe with the same theme of events coming back in Australia and weddings, people want to stay fit or be again fit. And this is what are the top searches right now in that industry in Australia. Looking now at the luxury fashion industry, we see Farfetch as the leader. They have 60% more traffic than Oroton, their biggest challenger. And you see Oroton with 24% growth, Depop also 28% growth, quite impressive. But in that specific category, what really caught our attention is that the top searchers, when you look at the popular search terms, they're all actually branded. And this is very interesting. What we've seen so far is that what product people wanted in the different categories. Here we see that in the top 10, people are not looking for specific products, they're looking for specific brands. They're very attached to their brands to their brands. And if you're really operating in that category, this is crucial for you to know when you are optimizing your content or search strategy. Now, if we move to the undergarments sector, we see that bonds and bras and things are leading the pack here, both owned by Hanes. So together they have about 32 million visits, which is quite impressive. They're by far the leader here in Australia. Booty.com.au has a very interesting 44% increase in traffic. And again, if we look at what consumers were the most interested in, what caught our eye is, first of all, sorry, I'm going to use my French accent for this French word, but lingerie was by far the top keyword, the top turn generating traffic to websites in that category. But you see very innovative period underwear at the top. You're going to see bamboo underwear also in the top searches, which clearly indicates the demand of Australian consumers here. But there was another thing that really caught our eyes here. And if you look at it at the bottom, it's glass house candles. And this is just an example of how market intelligence can really help you open your eyes or think outside of the box if you want to, for instance, provide other products that seem not related to your category, but it looks like that people looking for underwears were also looking for candles, maybe for romantic nights. And that's something that you could use, by the way, for offering either more products or in your acquisition strategy, include that as well. So it might seem very irrelevant, but actually you see that things that are not necessarily in your own category can attract traffic. And we thought that it was very interesting that it made it to the top 10. Now, there's no outfit that is complete without the right pair of shoes. So the final apparel sector we will untie here is the footwear. And here we see that in Australia, Foot Locker and Platypus shoes are leading the pack, 22 million and 20 million respectively in terms of visits. Really impressive, Frankie4.com that succeeded to double the amount of traffic since last year. So that's pretty impressive here in Australia. And if we look here at the main terms that generated traffic to that category, we see three brands that made it to the top 10: Vans, Dr. Martens, and Birkenstock. And again, you see terms like men's shoes, black heels, again, going back to that same theme of events and now no restrictions and people can, again, party and go to formal events. Now, we're just scratching the surface of digital intelligence here, and we could now dive into any brand's website to uncover which marketing channels are driving the most traffic, which keywords are the best performing, even what display ads are resonating the most with shoppers. Now, we would need an entire session for this, so we're not going to go there. But what we wanted to show you is that if we look at the entire acquisition strategy or acquisition channels from these categories, you can see very different trends. So for instance, undergarments are a lot more dependent on organic search. Luxury fashion companies are a lot more dependent on paid channels, especially display ads. Or if you look at footwear, for instance, they're really depending or relying on referral traffic. So knowing how your industry is performing best and how to attract your clients will be very crucial. But regardless in which category you're actually operating, Something that we found a very interesting insight here is that 55% of all the traffic actually come from organic or paid search. So it is the dominant force here in Australia, which means again that people are doing a lot more research here before they buy your product. But it could be also an opportunity for you because it means that if they were decided on where to buy their product, they would go directly to the website. Here, it looks like one out of two people here in Australia is still trying to choose or doing research. And this is really where you can optimize your acquisition strategy. So with that in mind, understanding what people are searching for, what trends are emerging, and what products are driving the most traffic can help you beat your competition. And up with this deeper understanding of consumer trends and behavior, you can again sharpen your digital strategy, grow your market share, and stand out. Now, everything we covered so far is really around what we call the top of the funnel. We've used website and search engine data to show that there are more Australians shopping online than before, and there are more Australians purchasing online than before. We also see how they're finding their things they want to buy, again, through which marketing channels. But one of the most crucial stages for customer acquisition is actually the checkout, right? The last thing you want is that people come to your website, browse and engage your website a lot, just so that they're gonna buy another product on another website. And here we can uncover some of the key behavioral shifts that are taking place in our industry. So it seems like a few years ago, buy now, pay later was a relatively niche offering, but today we see it pretty much everywhere. And there are a lot of providers offering the services. Today, you can pretty much anything you want now and pay later. Now, what we did at Similarweb is that we analyzed the traffic going to the main providers of buy now, pay later, and compared it to the traffic going to the sign-up pages of credit cards of the 4 biggest banks here in Australia. And what you can see here is that the results are night and day. September 2019 was the last time that there was more interest for credit cards, signing up to credit cards than buy now, pay later. And then March 2020, you can see when the pandemic actually started, you see that buy now, pay later actually boomed in orange. And what we see here is a certain consumer preference for buy now, pay later when shopping online. So the shift to e-commerce during the long months of lockdown really accelerated the adoption of buy now, pay later. Now, this is only historical trends. It goes until December 2021. So what we wanted to try and understand is it the same in 2022? And in short, the answer is yes. Although you see that in terms of actual traffic, you look at buy now, pay later, sign up page traffic is 4 times smaller than the credit card category traffic. But if you look in terms of growth, you see a much more impressive growth for buy now, pay later signups, 68% growth year over year, was just about 5% for credit cards. Knowing that buy now, pay later is very popular right now, especially in Australia, you could ask yourself, well, how are the providers performing here? And saying that Afterpay would be the dominant force here would be an understatement. According to our data, they own 75% of the online traffic. You see Zip with 18%, Lay-by 2%, Sharpen, Klarna 2% as well, and FUPay with less than 1%. Now, despite Afterpay owning 3/4 of the market share, we see Klarna with a very interesting growth of 76%. Now, so what does all of it mean for us? I've talked through a lot of data points, showed lots of pretty charts, and you might now be sitting there and wondering, well, what to do with all this information? The traditional way of measuring performance, especially in e-commerce, was always to focus on your own performance, trying to beat what we did last year. But this only gives you only one side of the coin. I'll give you an example. If you grew by 10% quarter over quarter, you might be very happy, your management, your investors. But if we show you that your competitors have all grown by 30%, it's a very different story. So using digital intelligence to measure not only your own performance, but your partners, your competitors, to try understand the industry trends driving traffic and identify emerging opportunities allows you to constantly refine your digital strategy and identify new opportunities. And I think this is the bottom line. trying to always refine, get the context that you need to refine your digital strategy, because we see that everything is moving so quickly, especially now as a time of recessions, product supply issues. A lot of things are changing in the industry, and you want to be the first one to react. So there are actionable insights that you can quickly take from analysis to achievement. I said at the beginning that COVID, I saw COVID as a prism. It's not just Emmanuel saying it or Similarweb. And it's not just saying that COVID accelerated digitization here in Australia. According to McKinsey, it actually accelerated digitization by 7 to 10 years. And especially if you look at our region of the world here in APAC, you see it's actually by 10 years. So as consumers become more and more accustomed to a digital by default way of life, digital intelligence will become more critical to understand shifting consumer demands and needs, and then you're going to need to stand out. And in order to succeed, you're going to need to understand the trends and dynamics in your market. You're going to have to continue to monitor your competitors, because there are new players every day. And Australia is a very innovative country, so you see a lot of very interesting startups that are disrupting the market. So continue to benchmark performance. What we tried to do here this morning is really to give you an idea of you need to get out of your comfort zone, your bubble, and look also what's happening outside, because that you can learn from best practices, you can learn from your enemies or your competition. And in that process, you're going to also improve the loyalty programs with your customers and proactively find new opportunities and revenue streams. But the bottom line is you need to be the first one to react in such a fast environment. So with the data and context, there's no more dark side of the moon. And when you understand what's happening around you, that's when you can truly make your digital strategy stand out. So I hope you enjoyed that session. We're very happy to take some questions. As Holly said before, we will be sending the slides and the presentation as well.
Yeah, thank you, Manu. Amazing. So much there to unpack. Actionable insights, like you said. Our participants probably have to go back and really, it was a breakfast bite this morning, but it's more like a whole Thanksgiving dinner that they have to go back and analyze now of what strategies they're using, how they're working for them. So I hope this is extremely helpful for everyone here on the call. As I mentioned, please do put any questions that you've got in the Q&A. We do have time for a couple of questions. So Manu, I do have one for you if you're ready. Sure. First question up is, do you see the similar trends happening across industries or just e-com?
It's a good question. So generally speaking, we do see that in most industries, traffic online is picking up again to what it was pre-pandemic. And actually in certain sectors, it's even now, as I mentioned before, it accelerated it. So if you take the travel industry, for instance, we could see that air travel is really back in Australia to what it was pre-pandemic. Unfortunately, cruises is not there yet. So we see that cruises websites have only picked up recently, and we see that it's still a bit behind and struggling, getting again their customers back. But ultimately, you will need to analyze every industry, because as I mentioned before, every industry reacted very differently to the pandemic. It had a very different impact. You see some of the most traditional businesses. Imagine a tire shop. Pre-pandemic, you would never think of changing your tires or ordering new tires online. You would go to your garage. But now we see that even the most traditional businesses are transitioning online. And this changed the entire ecosystem. So to the question, yes, we see a lot more traffic online in general, which is good. It's a lot of adoption, digital adoption, but certain industries have been impacted more than others by COVID. And the travel example was a great one, I think, where you see air travel has picked up very well again, but not necessarily the cruises.
Although none of us want to be in the airport for those crazy times that we've experienced on the big holiday travel weekends. Awesome, thank you. And the other question that we had, which I think you even started to touch on in that last answer, was are the like bricks and clicks who are a little bit more focused with their strategies now on going back to their like physical stores, do you think they're going to be putting more of their strategy on online, or how is that going to shift back and forth?
It's actually a great question. And talking to a lot of our customers, we understand that now that we're finally past all these lockdowns, a lot of the retailers or brands are doubling down again on their physical stores, which is a good thing. And we know that Australians love to be outside, love to go to their favorite shops. So I think it's a good thing. That being said, they should not ignore what's actually happening, which is what we saw this morning, is that there's been a lot of digitization. It's not only consumers who were forced to go online, but businesses as well. And again, people saw the convenience, the flexibility, the choice they have online. And I think that certain habits that started during the pandemic have stuck. So now brands and retailers have to really play in both arenas, I would say. The offline, again, in Australia, very strong, but the online as well. And I think that the combination of both will make the company really stand out. Obviously, at Similarweb, we can only speak for the online, and this is where we add the most value, or the only value actually online. But there is this trend of digitization and people moving more and more. And again, it's not just the consumers, it's everyone, professionals, customers, everything is done online. So you need to always monitor very, very carefully.
Great. And we've got time for probably one more question, which I've got here. So, you mentioned digitization and so many more people being online. And of course, personalization is always a big buzzword. So going back to some of the search data that you got, like how can those of us here on the call, it says, kind of leverage some of that search information to continue to keep those customers that we have got online, and that now are used to our processes and used to our funnel and used to converting with us. Like, how do we use some of that search data to know how we personalize and what they're really looking for?
I think that I will use something that you said in your question. We said we used to, and that's actually because we live a brand. If I have a specific product or brand that I'm selling, I live it every day. And then we're used to the same kind of thinking of strategy about how we want. And we sometimes think that, okay, we created these brands for this or this product for this kind of customers, and this is how we're gonna acquire them, and this is what they really need. Looking at our data shows that sometimes things that we haven't thought about could be extremely relevant. The example I showed here in this presentation was the candles. That was one of the main traffic generator in the undergarments category. So what we're trying to do here is trying to open your mind or the companies, and see really what's happening outside. And maybe there are certain searchers or demand we haven't thought about. And this is really what we see, trying to understand what people are asking, what people are searching for, and then you providing the answer. Some of the best SEO strategies I saw from our clients were actually the ones where we can see what people are asking on Google, for instance. So we see all the terms search starting with what, how, why, and then the companies would actually go and optimize their content to answer these questions. So I think before we can talk about best channels to acquire new customers, you really need to understand first what they're looking for, what they're asking for. And that's something you need to constantly monitor. What is relevant right now? What is relevant right now might not be relevant in 2 weeks or a month's time. And trying to think outside of the box is really what we're trying to explain here, because that will, in our opinion, and what we've seen from our customers, will generate new streams of revenue, and you can A/B test new things. And again, especially in Australia, it's a relatively small market. Everyone wants to have a piece of the cake, and you need really to be always innovative and be ahead. So that's why understanding them first, understanding the customers, will allow you to then acquire more customers.
Amazing. Thank you. It looks like those are all the time that we've got questions for. So I will just do another thank you to everyone who was able to join us this morning. I really hope you've got some great takeaways. And as mentioned, we will be sending out the recording and the deck alongside it. Thank you again, Manu.
Thank you very much.